today is already day 26. And we are going to read the chapter called Less is More. Really? The tricky part of homeschooling, and particularly writing, is that you can't see the growth as it happens. Looking back shows you the growth, but looking back happens when our children head off to college or Europe or get married, and that feels a teensy bit late. In other words, the very thing you need to reassure you that you are doing a good job with your kids is invisible to you as you do that good job with your kids. You're required to put your faith in the process rather than confidence in observable results. Or, alternatively, you have to change how you measure what you see. It really is enough to read aloud to your kids, to have your children copy some of those words into a little notebook, to have them take a stab at writing some of those words without looking while you dictate them aloud. It's enough if this happens once a week or 20 times in a year, and some years, even fewer times. It's enough to catch a few of your children's brilliant thoughts or quirky ideas in writing for them once in a while, so that they know that what's inside them deserves to be on paper too. It's enough to linger at dinner, discussing some topic like the puns in Seinfeld, or why Pocahontas, the Disney movie, is both so good you want to keep watching it, but so bad if you compare it to history that you feel guilty for loving it. It's enough to lie next to your kids at bedtime once in a while, to sing to them or listen to their stories, or to tell them some ridiculous saga you made up that goes on and stops making sense after a few weeks, but you both love it just the same. It really is enough if your kids read and read and read the same books over and over again, and it seems like they will never discover another author as wonderful as J.K. Rowling or Brian Jakes or Suzanne Collins or Ian Fleming or Jeff Kinney. One day you'll notice, oh hey, she's reading another book by somebody else. It's enough if you listen to what your kids say, if you have big, juicy conversations about the stuff that interests them, if you laugh at funny-sounding words and use absurdly big ones around them just to trick them and tickle their linguistic imaginations. It will be enough if they read a little poetry, look up a few song lyrics, memorize a couple tongue twisters, learn to tell a few really funny jokes, and figure out the delicious humor of Will Shakespeare in one of his comedies. In a movie, of course. It's enough if they cast their thoughts onto a page freely, attending only to the ideas or the sound of the words, and know they have a receptive audience in you. It's enough if they play with other writing forms, if they learn how to mop up their own mechanics, if they attempt half a dozen essays in high school, figuring out what it means to have a point of view that they assert, and then how to back it up because it matters to them. We make it so difficult. We expect our kids to match some other agenda than the one that delivers them happily into an authentic writing life. Less is more. Less hand-wringing, fewer assignments, less control, less nagging, fewer criteria. More is more. More conversations, more reading, more delight, more time, more space, more passion for language, more opportunities to play with words. I'm here to help you when you lose your nerve or your way. Quote of the day. Love this. Makes language development, or literacy as I like to call it, so real to life and less like a school subject. Linda Dempster. Sustaining thought. Less planning and more spontaneity results in happy moms and happy kids. So, this chapter, this essay, this reading, specifically focuses on the natural progression of a writing life. And if you are in one of those moments where you're doubting that you're doing enough or that you're creating the right context, this chapter can reassure you. It can help you see what the pegs are and what it looks like to gradually move through the writing life with your kids. It's difficult to constantly toggle between the reality of what you do and the fantasy of what you think you should be doing. It's an exhausting experience. Every home educator lives it. It's not something that goes away necessarily. I mean, there are parents who tell me it has gone away for them. And I think at a certain point, I found my own groove and confidence and felt like, yeah, we're doing enough. But there are those moments where even that self-confidence is faltering or falters, right? You run into a new challenge, preparing for high school, preparing for college. You join a co-op. You put your child in somebody else's care to be taught. These can take you from that burgeoning self-confidence right over the cliff back into anxiety. And so when those moments hit, maybe pause, maybe go back and actually look at what you've done this year. Pull out the notebook or the folder, or sit down and reminisce with your kids and see if they can remember what took place, and get a sense of the natural groove that your family finds that works for them, that you can embrace together. So I just want to look back over this. I started by talking about reading aloud because the foundation of literacy comes from a love of reading. And the way that you can bring that into being with your children can start in utero. Reading aloud is something that can be done even when you have a newborn. It doesn't almost matter if the information or the language is over the heads of kids. There is something about the intimacy of holding a book like this and sharing it aloud with another person. I spent years actually reading aloud even in my marriage. Some of our best memories are sitting together while I read, he listened, and we shared that story together. So reading aloud is not something just relegated to that one age frame where the child is old enough to follow the story but too young to read to themselves. Reading aloud is a practice that can go on all the way through the home education. So we start with reading aloud. We set a context. We create space to hear story, to hear language articulated through the voices of people who don't live in your family. We give our kids the opportunity of immersion so that their linguistic palette expands. A lot of times we talk about reading aloud as though it's just this stopgap, like until they can read. But the reason that I don't think that's the best way to see it, and why I even think reading aloud into junior high and for some high schoolers, is that it creates a dialogue. There is someone else besides you doing the processing of the language. And that allows you to have conversations, to hear intonation. You know how when you're reading to yourself, you don't know how to pronounce a word you don't know? So you memorize it weird. Have you ever done this? And then all of a sudden you're sitting on the couch eating popcorn and some person in a sitcom says it the right way and you're like, I had no idea that's how that word was pronounced. Well, reading aloud gives your kids a chance to hear how the words are pronounced in their right context. So you actually contribute to your child's lexicon of vocabulary just by virtue of being an older, wiser, long-term reader. And that's a really big, powerful way to create vocabulary for your child. You know, those vocabulary lessons that you think you need to give your kids? Reading aloud will take care of it. Reading aloud will take care of it. Read compelling, well-written literature, and the variety of vocabulary you will encounter will astonish you. Melissa Wiley, children's book writer, friend of Brave Writer, was at our Brave Writer retreat this summer. She did an entire session called Comic Books Make You Smart. Comic books make you smart. She went through and listed all the SAT, ACT vocabulary she found in one book of Calvin and Hobbes. So I want you to think about that when you're thinking about reading aloud and the content of those books. Some of the most sophisticated humor and irony and political speech will be found in comics, and it will be found embedded in the stories you read aloud. So dive in. Reading aloud is really important. Make sure that you include it in your family. The next step that I talk about is catching your children in the act of thinking. When they are self-expressing and sharing with you something that's valuable, you write it down for them. You jot it down and you read it later to the family gathered, to the spouse, to a grandparent. Give your children's voice writing. You know how we talk about give your children writing voice? Well, let's flip that. Give their voice writing. Take the words that come from their mouths and put them on paper, and then read them again. You can toss that writing into the reading basket. And when you are doing this read aloud time, you can be like, oh, look what Katrin wrote. Or, oh, let's see what Katrin had to say, and read it back. Can you read it more than once? Will you tell me? Do you read Goodnight Moon more than once? Do your kids read Harry Potter more than once? Of course you can read their writing more than once. They will love it. In fact, it could even be, for your child, their favorite book. Johanna wrote all these little books. I used to take paper, have you guys done this? And I would fold it in half, a whole bunch of them, and then I would staple down the side and cover it with construction paper. And then she would wake up in the morning, this is before she was reading, and she would draw pictures on every page. And then I would get up and I'd pick up this picture book and I'd say, tell me what's happening on each page. And there wasn't a cohesive beginning, middle, and end usually, but it was incredible how her own pictures would catalyze a narrative. And she would tell me this narrative and I would write it at the bottom, and those books went right into the library basket. We would pick up a book by Patricia Polacco, and then we would pick up a book by Julie Bogart, and we would read them. So think about how you can turn your child's voice into writing that gets read, because why would you write? If your writing doesn't get read and enjoyed, what motivation do you ever have to learn that skill? That can start at any age. It can start as young as 2 or 3 years old, and literally for blocked, reluctant, resistant writers, you can start right now with your 15 and 16-year-old. No, you're not going to snuggle on the couch and completely condescend and read them a little book. But if they say something interesting, information you don't know, tell you a story that's interesting, about what happened to them while they're playing a video game or when they're with one of their best friends at the mall, or how they understand veganism. When they start down that path, you can be scribbling it down on paper and read that back to their other parent that night. You can do that. And that creates value around writing, and it changes how your kids see you valuing their writing. So that's the second way. Of course, you can talk. Talk at dinner, talk about movies, talk about sports, talk about politics, talk about their best friend and what that best friend is accomplishing. Your job is to create a context where language is the chief way that your kids engage with ideas. That's an education. That right there is an education. One of my professors said to me when I was getting my master's degree, he said, a PhD is simply a better vocabulary in a discipline than anyone else. Think about that. Think about that for a minute. If education gives you a better vocabulary and you're able to marshal those terms, aren't you more educated? And that's what we're looking for with our kids. We are giving them a vocabulary in a variety of disciplines. We are introducing them to ideas and ways to express those ideas, whether it's annotations in the margins of a book or calculations written on a page that narrate and describe the processes we took to arrive at the outcome of that calculation, or an experiment where we take a variety of elements, bring them together in a meaningful way, and describe the scientific results. Do you see how even those activities require a certain vocabulary, a certain marshaling of the evidence or the tools to achieve the breakthrough? Language is our manifestation of education. And the deeper we go into any field, the richer and the broader the vocabulary. So we start with talking, and we have to have discussions. It's not enough to just sort of go around like simultaneous, beings in a home that don't connect, because the discussion is what creates holding on to that language. putting it in a meaningful context, learning how to use the language in sentences and paragraphs. And one of the funniest things you'll discover is that your kids are going to use words incorrectly. Your teenagers will use words incorrectly. Awesome. When that happens, awesome. Think back to this talk and go, oh, that's adorable. She's using that word and she doesn't quite know what it means. That's when you know you are on the precipice of integrating a new vocabulary word into your own life. When we lived in Morocco, my husband John would use Arabic before he understood it. I was like this student, I'd be studying. I wanted to say the sentences perfectly so no one could critique me. That's not how John learned language. John would get just enough going, and then he'd hear a word that he didn't quite know how to use, and he'd just throw it into the middle of his sentence and see what reaction he got. Just see the effect of this term on people. And often he was choosing, slang or words that a foreigner shouldn't naturally know, and it would crack them up. But the participation and engagement taught him the meaning of the words. That's what we're doing all the time. We're inviting our kids to raise themselves to a vocabulary level that isn't yet fully accessible to them. So they get to play and explore and test, try out the language. So yeah, read over their heads, put them in the context of language that's new to them. That's a great thing to do. And then have big, juicy conversations that explore things. You can talk about a movie and call the main character a protagonist before you explain what a protagonist is. Don't you think they'll figure it out? If you say Aladdin the protagonist, won't they figure out that the protagonist is the main character? So this is the way that you begin to expand your child's world of literature and literacy, by talking to a full-grown adult. And you have that in spades. I mean, how lucky are your kids? How lucky are your kids? You're fluent and articulate in English. If you grew up in a middle-class home, you've got good language skills. And those kids who grow up with less access to that, they have to work harder, because our society values a certain kind of speech and a certain kind of writing to get ahead. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that the other Englishes don't have value, because every version of English is clear enough and communicative enough to enrich the lives of the members of that community. In fact, it could be argued that the variety of Englishes gives us witness and access to the interiors of communities we typically reject. So it's important to value speech and language and writing in our own homes, and then to broaden that landscape through reading aloud, through great conversations, through staying current, through being self-educating parents. We learn alongside our children. I say this all the time. You do not have to come fully formed. You get to learn alongside your children. One of my friends, back when I lived in California, was a Latina. She was bilingual, fluent in English, fluent in Spanish. But because of where she grew up, she went to a school that did not teach her either of those in literate ways. So she lived with the anxiety that her spelling and punctuation in both languages were not right. It made her not want to write. So how did she compensate? Well, she went the full textbook route with her kids as she home educated, requiring grammar and spelling tests, and just fully overcompensated. And one day, as her child was hitting 5th grade, she felt that she did not know how to guide this child in English or Spanish. And I said to her, Blanca, get a tutor for you. Go learn English the way you deserve to have learned it. Go find out what you don't know, and then pass that along to your kids. And she did. And it was the most empowering experience for her. She went from total lack of confidence to instructing her own children, not simply passing them off to a tutor. The education she longed for her children to have, she got for herself and got to share it with her kids. That's homeschooling. That's incredible. So you can go get anything you don't have, and then you can pass that along to your kids. Absolutely. You can lie next to your kids at night, tell bedtime stories, sing lullabies. You guys can read the same books over and over. Katrin read the Harry Potter series 13 times before I knew she had read it 13 times. I get asked a lot, is it okay if my kids reread? Is it okay if you rewatch the same sitcom over and over again? Is it okay for you to reread Anne of Green Gables? Rereading is a powerful, powerful experience for everyone. The second, third, fourth time, you start making connections you didn't even realize were there to make on a first read. When all you're doing is reading for plot, you don't always pick up the themes or the setting or the foreshadowing or the callbacks to previous books or the depth of development of character or the magic of the way the language is strung together. Rereading changes how you understand the book, the series, the author, the characterizations, and even the lessons that that book has to offer. If someone is still interested on a 13th reread, there's a reason. Now I know that the feeling is, yeah, but will they ever read anything more classical or for school? Will they venture out into the book list that 10th graders should have read? I don't know. All I know is that if you give your kids the opportunity to stay connected to what's feeding and teaching them, they typically get fed and taught. And eventually, they do move on. It might take a while, but it's going to lead to the next thing. If, however, that book series becomes taboo, forbidden fruit in your family, sometimes it shuts down interest in reading. So go with the flow. You can always be reading aloud while your child is reading the same thing over and over. You can get interested in what they're getting out of it. You can offer other books that are in the same genre. And you can read aloud. You can have poetry tea time. You can still do your reading in the morning that the whole family listens to. You can share the things you're reading to yourself in sound bites and snippets. And trust the process. Trust the process. We wring our hands so much. My goodness, what a horrible problem to have. Your kid is obsessed with reading. Right? Okay then. Make sure you do read poetry and song lyrics. Poetry's awesome. It creates a different kind of imaginative space for language. We've found from the families who've been involved in poetry tea times over the years that children gravitate to writing poetry on their own more than any other kind of writing. Like if they're going to play with writing, a lot of them will take the risk with poetry after they've listened to poem after poem after poem. You know why? Because it's a manageable size. We're dealing with little stanzas and rhymes. We're not dealing with volumes. And punctuation is sort of optional in poetry. It's okay to be deliberately punctuation absent, right? I mean, we watch E.E. Cummings. He doesn't even bother to put capitals in his poetry. So kids know there's a little more room to play, a little more room to explore. Poetry creates also a second layer. It's intimate without being so revelatory. So you can express a feeling or a need without being so open about it. It gets buried and hidden and lodged in this poem. So read some poetry. Get some tea, make cookies, stack up the books, and share them. It works. You don't have to do a whole lot more than that. Go to poetryteatime.com if you need some poetry suggestions or treats or tips or things you want to know that help you feel confident. But I'm telling you, if all you did is stack up the books, drink something and eat something and read, you're good. You're done. In fact, my daughter Johanna, when she was a social worker in New York, she did poetry tea times with her kids. They loved it. That was the whole thing. It was the whole game. It doesn't matter. Your kids can be in school, not in school. They can be adults. They can be children. You can do poetry tea time at a nursing home, poetry tea time in a classroom, poetry tea time at a co-op. This is a transcendent practice. Everyone believes in it once they've done it. So just go for it. And join our Instagram. I have an Instagram account at Poetry Tea Time, and each day I feature a photo from a family just like yours. So you can take some inspiration for table settings and books to read. You'll see some Poetry Tea Time days gone totally wrong. That's always fun to look at. So definitely join that experience as well. And of course, we love free writing around here, getting your words out onto the page, turning on the timer, blazing along with a pen. You know, the only rule is don't stop writing. Try it. It's okay if it goes spectacularly bad, if no one enjoyed it, if they're complaining about the timer, if they fall apart crying. That's all right. If you see that happen, I want you to just go, wow, aren't we amazing? We tried this practice and everybody is falling apart. Spectacular, epic fail. Mic drop. You know, like just embrace it. It's free writing. Sometimes it's not going to go great. Sometimes everyone is going to whine and complain. And then a week later, set the timer again and give it another go. We're so worried about ever having a bad experience. I'm here to tell you, you're going to have a ton of them. That's just life. There will be days when what you try just doesn't really work. With free writing, the idea of this practice is to give your kids a tool that they can use for drafting for the rest of their lives. If they have to write an email, they know what to do. They can sit down, write it out quickly, allow the things to percolate in their mind, go back at it. This is before they write that email to the boss. Instead of painstakingly writing this really tight, hard to craft, anxious, stressed out email. Give them the tool. Help them discover how they excavate what's actually going on inside, how to self-edit, how to gain control of the impulse of expression rather than just expressing. My gosh, don't you wish that on Facebook more people would free write before they posted? They'd get in the habit of editing their thoughts before they spew them out for everyone to read, and then they get upset that people react. They haven't spent any time allowing the thoughts to percolate, giving themselves the opportunity to get it all out before they punish all of us with reading it. Know what I'm saying? Know what I'm saying? I think you do. I'm going to drink some water. I need to. Hold on. So, we teach free writing. We help our kids. We give them tools. Once they're comfortable with that self-expression, reading, discussing, poetry, jotting it down for them, free writing, now are they a little bit ready to try a piece of writing? Something they can compose, edit. They're going to free write. They're then going to compose it, take all those raw pieces of writing, move them around, rearrange them, add, subtract, find some quotes, paraphrase some experts. We call that essay writing. Give credit where credit's due for the ideas. Write a few essays. Play with it. Do they have to finish every essay they attempt? No, they do not. I remember being on the speech and debate team in high school. I got enamored with the kids who were really good at debate. I was young. I was a freshman, so I was doing much lower level debate stuff. And I watched this one kid deliver an argument in a way I had never seen it done. You know, I was 14. I came home and I wrote my own debate topic, my own speech, as though I was going to present what he did, and it never got presented. In fact, I don't think it ever saw the light of day. I don't think anyone in my life ever read it. I worked on that thing every day for a month. It was my favorite thing. I came home from school, I'd study my lines for the play, and then I would dive into this speech I was working on. And I still remember what it was about. It was about the food preservative called EDTA. I was making a case for why it should be illegal, why we should not allow it to be in food. I still remember that speech. I remember the arguments I made. No one ever saw it. It never got edited. It never got graded. It never got read. It never got delivered. I had the awareness from the environment I grew up in, a dad who's a lawyer, a mom who was a writer, that I got to play with ideas and making cases and using language. I didn't understand writing to be a school subject or debate to only be about a competition. I grew up knowing that I was forming my own mind life through language. And I got it by osmosis. No one gave me that lecture. I knew it from dinner table conversations, from watching the activity of my parents' lives. And I expanded that category to include me. I felt free enough to figure it out. Now, not all of your kids are going to do that in language. Language was the gift of my family for me. Your kids might be like that with mathematics, or IT with computers, or dance and self-expression in the arts. I don't know what your legacy is, but this model that I'm sharing with you in this essay about the writing life is a model of engagement with any subject. I just happen to know writing, so I've given you those categories. So when I got to the point where essay writing was a part of my life, it wasn't for school. Essay writing was part of my own self-exploration. It's what I did in my free time, not just for the essay in history, not just for the literary professor. I wrote argument, song lyrics, private journal entries, articles, all kinds, fiction, poetry. I wanted to explore what was going on up in here through a variety of writing genres. They were all available to me, and I used them not just in school. I used them in my personal life because they helped me know myself better. And that was my family legacy. Now, here's what's crazy. You all have one. Even those of you who are going, I don't have one. Yeah, you do. I want you to be patient, and I want you to spend some time today even thinking about what it might be. What might be happening is you might be disqualifying what it is. For instance, your family might be really good at remodeling houses. One of our team members, Tia, on our staff, her parents have taught her everything about how to build houses from the ground up. Literally, she has ripped down walls, moved wiring, and re-drywalled rooms of her house. I have never done that. I have no confidence that that could be done. Their family is this legacy of hands-on total capability. They believe they can build from the ground up anything they need. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. That's the family legacy that she has. So don't necessarily assume that it has to be in the humanities just because you're home educating. Here's what I want you to understand, however. Pause. Notice how you got to where you are, because there is a progression. What did I just read to you? We started with reading, conversations, jotting things down, playing with poetry, free writing, then essays, then degrees. So if we took this model and we applied it now to house construction and remodeling, well, wouldn't it look like having tools around, hammering nails just into boards, having saws that you can just cut things up, taking apart old computers and seeing what happens when you take them apart rather than putting them together? Wouldn't it look like helping peel wallpaper? Everyone gets a paintbrush and helps paint the kitchen, signing your name on the bottom of the door that you're about to hang so that you have ownership when you're 8 and 10. Right? Right? You don't just start with, today's lesson is you will be hanging drywall. Here are the 6 steps, and if you were to become a professional drywall hanger, here are the rules, and I will be grading you to make sure this career is available to you. I mean, is that how it would happen? No! It is an immersive life. Maybe your family is amazing at hospitality and creating meals. We used to go and watch Survivor every week with another homeschooling family that had 5 kids. One week they'd come to our house. The next week we would go to their house. Their family was expert in the kitchen. They made the most amazing gourmet, healthy meals I've ever had. There was always more than enough, and every child in that family knew what to do. Our family would show up, and their family was like peeling, chopping, hunting through the spice rack, figuring out which kind of, cilantro or parsley or what went in. They would taste it and comment with each other. They'd be serving it and making more food all at the same time. Those kids grew up, and my son's best friend went off to college and continued to cook. He's like an engineering major, and cooking is his passion. I am always laughing because I just imagine that one of these days his engineering and his cooking will meet, and he's going to recreate the range. It's going to be like a new thing because that's what he loves. So dive in, figure out who you are, and notice the ways that you accumulate experience that leads to this self-directed education, and take that model and apply it to everything. Apply it to everything, whether it's math or science or history. Get out of the school mindset. Remember that education is facilitating a depth of vocabulary in a discipline. Give birth to that experience through this incremental, immersive life, so that when your kids are older, they can continue to access it because it's meaningful to them, not because they simply have to take a test at the end of all this. Make sense? And the crazy thing is, the title of this essay was Less is More. Less is more in the sense that you are talking about less guided, structured, graded, assessed learning, and you're focused on the more of that immersion of a life lived. That's what gets it done. If you think about even famous athletes like Tiger Woods, and I don't want to talk about his family's parenting because I really don't know about that, but he was immersed in the world of golf from 2 years old. He's on David Letterman with his little, golf club. He lived his life on a golf course. That became the world that informed everything about his skill set. And I'm not saying we're all aiming for being superstar status, but to become a superstar or to become effective in any field, it takes this lengthy time investment of small repetitions over and over and over again, with as much access and freedom to fail as possible. Not these sort of narrow, just get the 2 pages done because you have to feeling around the subject area. If there isn't some, breathing space, some opportunity to take a risk, to have a bad day, to not understand, to lack curiosity, if there isn't some of that mixed in, you're suffocating the subject. You're suffocating it. It can't grow and expand. It won't become meaningful to your kids. Yeah. What are we all saying here? Did anybody say what their gifts are? What their families are? Oh, you can totally apply this to math. In fact, funny segue. Natural Maths, Maria, her last name is hard for me to pronounce, but Maria and Shelley Nash, they are from Natural Math, and I am doing a webinar with them in November. They're hosting it. I'm showing up. We are going to be doing math activities combined with poetry. 2 weeks. I think it is November 2nd and November 9th, which are Wednesdays. And it will be 4 in the afternoon Eastern, 1 in the afternoon Pacific time. Sign up. There are only 50 spaces. So I already know people are signing up, but I'm reminding you because I put it yesterday on Instagram, and tomorrow it will go out to our big email list. That is going to be a lot of fun. Great example of taking 2 disciplines and seeing how they support each other. So we'll be doing all these math fun things, and you'll need scissors and paper, and your kids will be there. It's not just for parents, it's for kids. And then I'm going to help you take that vocabulary that you are developing while you're working with these math concepts. We're going to put it in poetry, and I'm going to give you ways to do it. So it should be really, really fun. You can sign up on the Natural Math website. I will post a link, though, in this right afterwards, okay? So you know exactly where to go. It is $49 for these 2 weeks together. Mary Wilson says her gift is just enthusiasm, and she applies it anywhere. Okay, Mary, that is so true about you, but also you are so good at translating literature into a practical lived experience for your kids through your parties. Those are such a gift, and you are giving them a model for engagement on every subject level. Mary Wilson, everybody, go to her blog, Not Before 7. There is so much richness there. So don't let her fool you with her little, oh, I'm just enthusiastic. She's enthusiastic with a complete practical application that you can all copy. Iseni, I hope that's how you say your name. This is good for all of us. Sometimes I think I'm afraid to try learning new things. I read about them, but never really learned in an immersion style. So this is what you do. You create space now to take risks for yourself. You start out and you say to your kids, we're going to try something new, and I'm afraid it's going to bomb, but if it does, we're all going to laugh about it. We're just going to chalk it up to experience. Help me out. Let's get started. And I think we need fill in the blank. Cookies, orange slices, brownies, popcorn to get us started. You know, pair it with something yummy. I know sometimes parents say to me, Julie, quit saying brownies. Like, we're healthy people. Okay, make healthy brownies. But there is something about food that's nurturing. Let's put food in its right place. It's celebratory, it's nurturing, it is ethnically identifying, it creates community. Let's use food in the way it's supposed to be used instead of being afraid of it. Oh, it's unhealthy. Oh, it's going to make me fat. Can we use food the way it's meant to be used, the way it's used the world over, as a celebration, as a bonding community creator? You get to decide what that is. Every day I lived in Morocco, at 4 in the afternoon, people would walk out of the doors of their homes and show up unannounced at the doors of other people's homes. You would knock, and your friend Fatima would answer the door, and she'd say, Yasmina, which was my name when I lived in a Moroccan Arabic country. And she would say, come on in, and you would go to their lovely little sitting room that was beautiful, because all sitting rooms had to be beautiful. And she would start making food. I would end up with these homemade, almost like pita bread. It's a kind of bread they made in Morocco that was on the stovetop. They'd bring out homemade jam. They'd bring out a plate of cookies, coffee and milk, hot, drunk from a glass, and we would sit, talk, and eat. This happened every single day. I got to the point where I never was without food to share. If someone showed up at my house, we brought food out. Olives, dishes of almonds, dates. I would keep a recipe handy because if it was someone fancy, you could leave them in your sitting room while you made it in the kitchen. They were good with that. You could be gone for a half hour baking, cupcakes and come back and bring those out because food was central to the connection. And I think that's why I'm passionate about it. It's why I say things like add brownies. You can decide what the food is. It can be dates and olives. Go for it. What I'm trying to call out of us is this notion of connection, of celebration, of enriching an experience from it being this desk-bound assessment. I can't even find the words. School is so oppressive to learning. I'm sorry to say it. I had good school experiences. I absolutely did. I've shared them. I've written about them. And my kids had some good school experiences. But there can be this oppressive quality to it. You are not at school. You are at home. Take advantage of all those properties for learning. And food is one of them. Okay? Yeah. Drudgery, right. We want to get away from drudgery. So use all the tools in the toolkit. Literally. Hammer with nails. Use your sewing machine. Bake at the oven. Use your computers and iPads and televisions and gaming systems and toaster ovens and drive in your car. Jump on your trampoline. Have all of your read aloud rotate room to room to room around the house for a week so you have a different view. So your kids are looking at something different this week instead of just the same wall they've seen all year. Yeah, create space to nurture your gifts. Thank you, Nancy. It's perfect. Jennifer's trying to teach her girls they can accomplish whatever they want. The power lives within them. Yep, absolutely. Jennifer learned how to crochet. That's fabulous. That's great, Sarah. Sarah says the reason she loves me is because I say add brownie and I drop a mic in the same hour. That's hilarious. All right, these are getting longer and we cannot do this. You have homeschools to run and I have a business to run. So this was great. So look at the gift you have for your family. And instead of thinking about more academics, think about the less that really is more in your lives. What is the modeling, the immersion, the enthusiasm, as Mary reminds us, that creates the momentum of learning in your family around any subject, okay? I want to end by saying that Caitlin, oh my gosh, Caitlin, there you are. This is so funny. I was just about to announce this. Caitlin Curley and Kara Stevenson from the Homeschool Sisters have a podcast. And this week on all their platforms, it's Brave Writer Week. And they interviewed me, and that podcast is ready to be listened to. We talked all about awesome adulting, homeschooling, what my one piece of advice would be to the new homeschooler. You gotta listen to it. First of all, they're delightful. And it was a great conversation. And I think I might have even dropped a new insight. I said to them, hey, I'm about to say something I'm not sure I've said anywhere else. So if you want to hear something I haven't said, I feel like I repeat myself constantly, go to their podcast. Plus, they are also doing a contest, and you will win a prize sponsored by Play for Life Moms, our other favorite people in the world, Christy Thomas and her partner. And you guys, just go. Homeschool Sisters podcast. Come on, Caitlin, stick it in the comments. Have a great day. See you tomorrow back here, 8 in the morning. Mwah. Live honestly, write bravely, immerse extensively. I like this. I like having to come up with that final word pair every day. Bye, everybody.